Hi everybody, Sophia here from Highland Birth and Beyond, and today I am joined by the lovely Rebecca. Hi Rebecca.
Hello.
Rebecca is a first-time mum. She was one of my lovely prenatal yoga students and then moved on to enjoy baby massage and mum and baby yoga. Rebecca found out at 36 weeks that her daughter, who had been in what we thought was the perfect position for birth the whole way through, was actually in a breech position. So Rebecca went on to have an ACV to try to help her baby to turn, with no success. So here was Rebecca with all of these dream birth plans in her mind that she'd been working with for weeks and weeks and weeks, and suddenly dream birth looked to be out of the window. So tell us a little bit about that, Rebecca. How did it feel when you first found out that Rosamund was frank breech position?
Yeah, so I was pretty devastated. I mean, I'd done all of the, I suppose, like antenatal classes and read about hypnobirthing and things. And even when I'd been doing that, I know that everyone says, it's a preference, not a plan, and you've got to be open to things changing.
Yeah.
I think even though I'd done that, I was really, I suppose it's quite arrogant in a way, but I was like, yeah, but I'm not going to have a C-section. Like, the things that are going to change are going to be, whether I have pain medication or, if we have to have a forceps delivery or things like that, or the birthing pool isn't available. And it never really kind of sort of went in that like C-section was something that could happen, because I was like, but I'm doing the hypnobirthing. I know all about how I'm going to make sure that I've got all this oxytocin and I'm calm and I'm ready, and kind of all of these things. I was like, this is going to work. And I sort of thought, oh well, maybe if I'm in labour and there's something that's worried about the baby in any way, then yeah, of course, I'll go have a C-section. And I know people that's happened to. So I was sort of like, that's how it's going to happen. And then, so when I found out, it was just like, I suppose it's like you've got all the emotions of pregnancy, but honestly, it was like the world has ended. Like, this is like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I remember I sort of fell out with hypnobirthing and kind of everything, because I was like, well, what's the point? What's the point of practicing this breathing if I'm not going to have, I'm not going to go into labour, I'm not going to have any of the the things that I've been thinking about, creating this kind of lovely calm birth environment. That's not going to happen for me. So there's no point. I'm very just sort of quite a negative place in that respect, but also very much like, I've got to do everything I can to try and make my baby turn. And we talked about, I went for an ECV and that didn't work. And that was really the point at which I started to go, okay, this is kind of just how it's going to be. Like I'm probably going to have a C-section. And after I'd had the ECV and it hadn't worked, the consultant came and spoke to me and sort of said, look, your choices are, we can book you in for a C-section, or we can you can think about having a vaginal breech birth, which actually the hospital, Coldare Hospital, are very supportive around vaginal breech birth, and that was something that was definitely an option on the table. And I knew immediately, I was like, that is not something I want to do. I know that lots of people, have wonderful births that way, but for me, it just wasn't something that I wanted to do. So then sort of, I was like, well, I've got to have a C-section, but I was like, I don't want to book in for a C-section, partly because I wanted to give my baby as much time as possible. Like, I still had this little bit of hope that my baby would still turn, that it would all happen at like the last minute. So I wanted to have as much time as possible, but also a little bit from I suppose, my own kind of point of view. I wanted my baby to choose when she arrived. So I remember saying to the consultant, you know, I'd like to go into labour first. And the consultant was kind of like, well, why do you want to do that?
I want to use my hypnobirth breathing. I really do.
Yeah, it was kind of quite a not an abrupt question, but you know, it was very much like, well, why do you want to do that? Like, why don't you just want to book in for a C-section? And I sort of said, well, because I've heard that there's benefits of doing it, and it's, you know, I want to give my baby as much time as possible. And actually, the consultant, she was really supportive of that. She just sort of said, like, you know, it had been a sort of immediate comment because not many people choose to do that. Most people just go, right, I'm going to book in for a C-section. Yeah. But you know, there are benefits to going into labour, and we sort of talked about, you know, not so much for your baby now, but if you have a baby in future, then having gone into labour can be beneficial. So she sort of said, you know, I'm happy with that. She's like, I would like you to book in at some point, just so that we've kind of got you booked in. But if we're going to go down that route, you need to go have a scan just to check that if, you know, because babies at a breech can come quite quickly, we need to know that if you did have to have a breech delivery, that, you know, the baby's not going to get stuck. Because I think what they worry about is obviously the sort of size of your pelvis and the size of the baby's head, just to check that, you know, nothing's going to like, it would be safe to have a breech delivery. So they just wanted to make sure that if you know, for some reason I couldn't have the C-section, then that would still be an option.
So I really love at this point, Rebecca, sorry to interrupt, how much you've been able to be involved and included in that process and conversation. So you haven't just got somebody saying, you know, you're not sitting back as the mum to be saying, well, am I allowed to do this? What do I have to do? You're very much involved in it, and your consultants are excellent in the sense that they were giving you the options. You know, here's your choices, here's more research, go and make up your own mind. That's brilliant. That's really what we want for everybody.
I mean, and that was one thing that really helped me in terms of just hypnobirthing and understanding what the options were, so that I could say, actually, this is what I'd like to do. I mean, there were certainly things that when I said to the consultant, you know, like I said, I'd like to try and have a gentle C-section rather than so, you know, trying to make it as much like a sort of natural delivery as possible. And that was something that the consultant, because I did have some sort of notes of this is what I'd like my C-section to be like. And she sort of said, well, that's not really possible with a breech delivery. You know, we're probably just going to have to get the baby out as quickly as possible. So there were definitely things where it was, you know, things that wouldn't have been appropriate, and you know, they definitely said where they thought it wasn't appropriate. But because I knew sort of, I had an idea of what I wanted, and you know, we could have that discussion rather than it just being, I think if I hadn't known those, like known what the options were, I think that it probably would have been a case of, you know, after I'd had the ECV, right, we're booking you in for a C-section now, and that's, you know, that's just what's going to happen. So yeah, definitely, you know, learning and doing the hypnobirthing really helped with that.
So even though you can't have, or you couldn't at that point have everything that you wanted, the very fact that somebody was willing to listen to you and explain why that wasn't appropriate or why that wouldn't be the best course of action still helped you feel like you were part of that process, as opposed to then just going, no, forget that. Which would not have felt very good, would it?
Yeah, and as I say, I think that all of these things were kind of helped me definitely get from that place of feeling very negative about a C-section and like, this is the end of the world, this is not what I wanted, to getting kind of back on track and feeling like, okay, this isn't what I wanted, but I've still got choices, I've still got ways of making it better, and making it right for me, rather than just kind of, you know, this is you're not having the water bath and you're just going to have a C-section. It's going to be booked in and, you know, end of discussion. So yeah, definitely helped.
So then after you've had those, the ECV and those conversations, and you've decided you want to wait for labour to start, it really was a case of, well, off you go, get on with your own life at the moment, see what happens. And maybe you still want to do some of the, I'll stand on my head, put my arms in the air, rub my tummy, pat my head, all these different things to see if you can get your baby to turn. And I joke, but actually spinning babies is a really important thing. It is possible to turn some babies, but not all. And as Rebecca said, sometimes that's to do with size, with positioning, and sometimes babies just don't want to be turned in the same way that you don't like to be moved when you're sleeping in bed at night. So at that point, it was just back to life as normal. And then there was one marvellous day where you and Neil were pottering around, wasn't there? Tell us about this one.
Yeah, so I'd had the ECV at 37 weeks, and I had my due date. And even though I knew like babies don't arrive on their due date, or most babies don't arrive on their due date, I in my head, like everyone told me, first babies are always late, you know. And so I had this, I was like, I've got weeks, you know, I'm going to be, you know, waiting around, trying to fill my time and going swimming and doing all the things that I planned to do on my maternity leave. So yeah, so that was, the ECV was on the Monday. The following Sunday, we went to Skipton, which is about an hour away from where we live. I think it must have been like nesting instinct. I had this like obsession that I really needed to get some prints to like finish the nursery. I needed it finished, and I was getting really stressed out. And Neil was like, "Right, change of scenery. We're going to go to Skipton." So we went and we sort of had a little bit of walk around, and then we went and got some fish and chips in the little kind of fish and chip shop there, and we sort of had lunch, and that was really lovely. And then as I was getting up to go to the counter to pay, I sort of took a couple steps, and then I went, "Oh my God, I've wet myself." and I sort of like, I just had this moment where I was like, I haven't wet myself. Like, I know that happened. I know when you get to that point at like sort of, you know, 37, 38 weeks where everything kind of feels like you're not in control. But I was like, I'm pretty certain I haven't just wet myself. But I was like, yeah, no, there's definitely like a lot of liquid. And that I had this, like, I can't remember if I kind of worked out or whether I just sort of rushed into like the toilet. They had like a disabled toilet, which was like just around the corner from where I stood. So I just went in there and I sort of went, okay, my waters are broken. And I think that, so when I'd done like antenatal classes, it had all been very much like, you know, it's not like in films, it's not like a gush.
Except when it is like in the films.
It's like you'll be sat on the sofa and it'll just be like a little trickle, and you'll probably already be in labour, and it's like that. It wasn't like that. Like I wasn't in labour. I'd had no contractions or anything like that. And they say I just suddenly, like, my waters went, and they properly went. Like,
it was the fish and chips that did it.
It was, you know, just, I say I just not expected it, and no one had told me to really prepare for that. Like, I don't think anyone had said to you that, like, so I didn't have anything with me. Like, I didn't have any maternity pads or anything like that, because I just wasn't expecting it. And I think, as I say, I'd thought that, not that my baby would come on her due date, but certainly that she wouldn't come before her due date. So I'd just been completely unprepared. And so obviously Neil sort of paid for our fish and chips, and then sort of came to the toilet door and knocked on the door and was like, "Are you okay?" I said that my waters are broken. Can you just go to, there's a clothes shop across the road. Can you just go in and buy me a pair of clean leggings, because, like, you know, I need a change of clothes. So he went and got some leggings and came back. And I sort of tried to like clean myself up as much as possible, and then put these clean leggings on. And then we sort of walked out, and Neil's like, "Right, we'll just, you know, we'll get in the car and we'll we'll drive to the hospital. And I was like, well, I can't, like, I am just leaking. Like, if I sit in the car, it's going to ruin the car seat. I was like, right, go buy me a towel. So we went off into the shop again and went and bought a towel. And I got on the phone to the maternity assessment unit and I sort of said, look, my baby's breech, or she was breech last time I was scanned. My waters are just broken. Should I come in? And I'm like, yeah, you know, come in. We'll be waiting for you. We'll be ready. Just come over as quickly as you can. And it was this kind of weird moment because I knew that breech babies come quickly. So I had this panic of, I've got to get to the hospital as quickly as possible because, say, we were like an hour from home. I didn't have my bag in the car or anything like that. So there was we need to get there as quickly as possible. But at the same time, I remember just feeling really calm, like, okay, this is happening. I'm going to have a C-section, like it's going to happen tonight. Our baby's arriving tonight. And I remember I just sort of put together a playlist on my phone because I hadn't done that yet. And as I say, we just sort of had this to drive as quickly as possible, but also quite calmly, just like, okay, so we're going to have a baby tonight. So yeah.
I'm always telling people now when we talk about playlists, I'm like, do not wait, do it now. Because even if you think a playlist is going to take you 5 minutes, if it's one of a list of things, each of which takes 5 minutes, suddenly you're like, oh, we don't have time. Plus, you can never remember everything that you want in that playlist at the time. It's when they just pop up. So I always say do them along the way. So from your point of view, if somebody is in the later stages of pregnancy now, you would say to them that sometimes your waters do break, just like in the movies. So it is a good idea to have some maternity pads or pads, not pans, or a change of clothes, and also to have, if you're driving or being driven, to have something that you can sit on in the car so that doesn't happen. Now, a really personal question, I hope you don't mind me asking, I've not primed you on this. When your waters broke, was there the comedy puddle on the floor, or was you were just aware of how much the waters had broken?
Yeah, so it wasn't like a puddle on the floor. It was definitely like my jeans were like
absorbed everything.
My jeans and like right down into the boots. It wasn't like all over the floor. It wasn't, you know, but it definitely, you know, there was. I suppose it's that thing that I probably thought there was a lot of liquid, and it wasn't like trickle, but it wasn't just like a sort of, you know, tidal wave.
Well, we all know when we spill a glass of wine or a glass of water that a small amount can go a long way and make stuff really wet. So it's the same kind of thing, isn't it? But particularly if you're wearing jeans, and at least for you, it was a cooler time of year. It was kind of October, wasn't it? So it's not as if it was June and you were out in a pair of shorts or like a summer dress and you're like, oh.
I think my jeans kind of soaked up most of it. But and this is another thing that I think I hadn't really. I don't know if it's just sort of blissful ignorance, I guess. But what I didn't realize is like your waters break, but it's not just like one moment, like one kind of gush. It is like continuous. So from that point on, it's like every time I moved, I could kind of feel that, you know, there was more fluid coming out, and so that was kind of a really, I don't know, like, I mean, it's, you know, it's not particularly pleasant, but also I was kind of panicking because I was like, oh my God, like, is there anything left around the as well? So,
when is this stuff going to stop?
Yeah, it's definitely weird. And obviously the feeling of the kicks and things change because there's less of this kind of water around as well. So yeah, that was a bit odd.
So lots going on. So at that point, you go home so that you can get your hospital bag. Talk to us from hospital bag back to hospital. What happens?
Yeah, so I got my hospital bag, and actually when we got home, I was quite calm. I was like, right, I'm going to have a shower, and I just needed it to kind of clean myself up, feel human, put on like a new pair of leggings and pants and pads and all that. So get myself kind of prepared to go to hospital, which, although we were sort of rushing, I mean, it was probably only about 15 minutes, but I did kind of need that of like, having a hot shower and feeling kind of ready. And then I grabbed an orange on my way out the door, which is very rare, because I was like, right, I'm going into, I need to have something healthy, like, because I've eaten this massive fish and chips dinner. I'm going to have an orange, and that'll see me through, like something nice and healthy before I go, and like, last supper kind of thing. I'm heading off to hospital. So we got there to the maternity assessment unit, and say the midwives, they're like, right, okay, we know you're coming in. Put me on the monitor straight away, check baby's heartbeat, checking the baby's position, to do the scan, and they're like, yeah, baby's still in breech position. And then it was kind of a lot of waiting around, because I remember I had a registrar who's different registrar to the one who actually did delivery, came in and got me to sign all the forms, consent forms for a C-section, and said, are you happy that that's what you want to do? And then they said, well, what was the last thing you ate? I was like, well, I ate an orange and I was going out the door. And so I said, I'd had fish and chips, and then I had orange, and that was about 4 o'clock. And I'm like, right, okay. And then came back and said, right, well, the anaesthetist it doesn't want to give you the spinal until you've had at least 6 hours where you haven't eaten anything. So like a clear 6 hours, no food and drink. So from now, you can't have anything else. You can't have a drink. You can't have, obviously any food. We've just got to get to sort of say 10 o'clock. But they were like, well, obviously we want to get you to 10 o'clock, but you're not in established labour. So actually what we'd like to do, because it's Sunday night, is, if possible, keep you in overnight and to take you for the C-section in the morning. Because there's no urgency, you're not in labour, it's all fine. So sort of waited around, and then they went, when there was a room available, took us to the delivery suite. And I remember going into the delivery suite and saying, can I just have like a glass of water to because it's really hot. like, well, you can have a glass of water. I remember the midwife being like, but you can just wet your lips. You're not allowed to like drink it. Okay. And I said, well, I'm in quite a lot of sort of pain and awkward position. Can I have a birthing ball? It's like, no, you can't really have a birthing ball, because that's gonna make the baby come quicker. So I sort of found myself strapped to the bed with the monitor on, sat on my back on a bed on a labour ward, which was so far away from what I'd originally planned. And so we sort of sat there for a couple of hours. I remember it being quite boring, to be honest. I had my Kindle, so I was reading that. I had just like a cloth with a bit of lavender oil, which I'd originally had that as part of my original birth plan, as when I was going to have this lovely, beautiful water birth. And so I was sort of using that to sort of the scent of it, to try and keep myself calm, and still trying to be as calm and relaxed as possible. I was able to walk about a little bit, but as I say, they were very much, you can't do things that are going to encourage the baby to come along. And so at the point that I'd been moved to the labour ward, I'd consented to having an internal exam. Again, something that I'd not actually planned on doing when I was planning to have an actual delivery. But my cervix was fully closed, even though my waters had gone. And I was starting to get a little bit of contractions, nothing particularly strong. And then in the course of those couple hours that we were sat in this room on the labour ward, they came back and said, right, you're starting to get proper contractions now. We can see on the monitor. I remember I'd been thinking, like, the next time the midwife comes in, I'm going to ask for gas and air, because I hadn't had anything till that point. They'd offered me paracetamol, and I didn't need it. I didn't feel like I needed it at that point. But I remember I'd sort of got to the point where I was like, this is getting quite intense. I was like, if I'm not in established labour, then I don't think I really want to be in established labour. Like I'm kind of struggling with this. And I was doing the 4/8 breathing, and you had my lavender oil, and was just trying to relax as much as possible, but I wasn't able to do a lot of the kind of more active things. And so when they came in and said, actually, you know, you are in established labour now, so we'd like to do another internal exam. So I did that exam, and I was 5 centimetres dilated. So I dilated very, very quickly. And that was the point that I went from being a category 3 C-section, which is a planned C-section delivery, sort of no urgency to it, to a category 2 C-section, which is what most people would term an emergency C-section. So it's not a true emergency in that you're not under general anaesthetic, which is for a category 1, but there's a risk to mother or baby if the baby isn't delivered. So sort of midwives sort of rushed about, went and got on the spoke to the registrar, came back in, threw some scrubs at Neil, and was just like, right, you need to get everything you need because we're going to theatre now. And so I sort of put back on the bed and wheeled to theatre. Neil obviously had to get changed and put scrubs on, and sort of grab, a hat and a nappy and things for the baby. And then we were off to theatre, and so that was about 8 o'clock. So it was about 4 hours after I'd gone into the assessment unit, and I was still doing my 4/8 breathing, and I found that really helpful when they did the spinal, because it helped me to kind of stay, so to sit on like the edge of the bed, and then obviously they put it in your back. But I found, because I was having quite intense contractions, I found that was quite helpful, because I knew I needed to kind of stay as still as possible. And then it was just a case of waiting for that to take effect. And then it was just the C-section. I mean, from my point of view, I was sort of laying on the bed. Obviously, there was a lot of things going on around me, but I just had Neil sort of sat next to my head. We had my phone just sort of next to me, playing the playlist that we put together. And and it just sort of, I mean, I could, someone had described a C-section as feeling like someone doing the dishes in your stomach, and it does feel a little bit like it's not painful, but you can definitely feel kind of like tugging and movement, which is a bit of an odd sensation. But yeah, and then Rosamund was delivered, so they held her up above the kind of the curtain, and obviously we didn't know the sex at the time, so we're like, it's a girl. And then she immediately proceeded to start to do a poo. So rather than having delayed cord clamping and all the things that for her to go straight on my chest and things, they just went, right, we need to just clean her up, make sure that none of it comes on you, because obviously it's everything's open. So took her off to the side. Neil went with her, and the midwives cleaned her up and weighed her, and then he put a nappy on her, and then they brought her straight back to me, and then she didn't move from my chest for most of the night then. So yeah.
So you've really, at this point, you've moved so far away from the idea of your dream birth. The bits you're holding on to, even when all of this is going on, and there's been a lot of activity, a lot of different things. You've got to experience labour, you've had your waters break, you've allowed your labour to start naturally, you've dilated, all of these different parts have happened. And yet there's still the little part in your brain that goes, I have my lavender. I got to hold on to my lavender. It was in my plan. It's one to me. Healthy baby at the end of it. That was in my plan, number 2. And then you still had your 4/8 breathing to be able to do, and your playlist, and to have Neil there. And you've still gone through the process with all of the brain's acronym, the benefits, the risks, alternatives, instincts, do nothing, and smile. You've still had access to do all of those, but there's a part of you that at that moment in time, no matter how Rosalind had got to be on your chest, it was still just like, yes, this was what it was all for.
Yeah, and I remember saying when they just kind of lifted her up, I was just completely, overwhelmed. And it didn't, in that moment, it didn't matter to me kind of, how she'd arrived. It was just that she'd arrived and she was there, and she was healthy. I remember when they took her to site, I do remember feeling quite kind of panicked, just because I was like, is she crying? Is she okay? They had a paediatrician just in theatre. Didn't have a consultant because the consultant was on call on a Sunday night, and it was all too quick. So it was just a registrar who did the delivery. But yeah, as I say, they brought her back over to me straight away, and they're sort of like, it's all fine. And then we were just there for quite a long time, really, because they were trying to make sure they got all the placenta. And I know that they were a bit worried that they hadn't got it, that there was the point at which I was obviously bleeding. They were worried that I was going to have quite a lot of blood loss. They went, right, we're just going to, close you up now. We think we've got everything. Yeah. So that took a bit of time. And but yeah, it was all, even though I'd read about, gentle C-sections, and we didn't have delayed cord clamping. We didn't have music on the stereo system. It was just my phone by my head. We didn't have the lights dimmed. We didn't have a discussion about whether they'd lower the curtain or anything else. But that didn't matter. It was, I say, me and Neil next to me, and we were listening to songs. We got to choose which song was playing when she was actually delivered. I know that I probably would have wanted the curtain down, but Neil definitely didn't, because he even says it now. He's like, there are some parts of your wife that need to remain a mystery. So he was, and to be honest, it was good for him, because I think he's not squeamish, but he definitely, like, when we've gone for scans and things, he'd got quite faint, and had lots of nurses fussing over him during the scans. So actually, for him, it was really good, because he was able to just kind of sit next to me, and then obviously Rosamund was born. He was able to go with her and then kind of come back. And he was able to stay with me the whole time. And then we were taken back out into the recovery area, and the midwife helped me get Rosalind sort of on my breast, because I'd sort of been trying to get her to latch, but it hadn't really happened. And so they sort of changed my position and got her latched so that I could feed her. And then they took me to the labour ward to recover. And so it's probably about midnight, and I know that because it's a multiple occupancy ward, like I wasn't in a private room, so they sort of said to me, you don't have to rush, but at some point you have to go. And that was sort of the point at which he then obviously went home, got some sleep, and but he'd been with me the whole time.
Yeah, which was really amazing. And as we, just for clarification for anybody watching, this was way pre-COVID, so Neil was able to stay there for that bit longer. And then I know that when you had a few days to be in the hospital initially, didn't you, so that you could just have that recovery time, so that you established a really good latch with Rosalind, and also just so that you could have a bit of time to recover. And although you had the support because you had medical staff around you, I guess there's always the question in your mind of, what would the support have been like, or how would that have been different if I was at home as well? But overall, you had a positive experience of still being in the hospital for that time, didn't you?
Yeah, I kind of enjoyed being in the hospital. I don't know if that's quite the right word. But it was nice, because it was like there was no pressure to do anything. I didn't have to get up, and that was really good, because obviously it is really difficult. So first of all, having the spinal, that last, I think the effects of that were it must have been like at least 8 hours. So like in that first night as I was on the ward, I had people coming and checking on me every like 30 minutes and helping me turn, so turning from side to side to make sure that I wasn't on one side for too long. And then I remember it kind of getting like light because I was right next to a window, and then the nurse coming up sort of, must have been about 5 a.m. It was really early and taking me for a shower, and I passed out. And I passed out when I was like getting dry from having a shower. And then they were starting to walk me back across the corridor back to the bed, and I passed out again. Took the nurse by surprise. And then it was only when I sort of got back to bed, they're like, oh, so, have you eaten anything? I was like, no, I've not eaten anything. Like,
back to that orange again.
Yeah, tea and toast, because they had offered it to me, but it had been like 1 a.m. I was like, I don't want to eat now. Like, I'm not going to have a cup of tea. So then they gave me that, and then they gave me breakfast, and then I just literally sat in bed for 3 days. I had people coming and getting me meals. So Neil would go to the day room and get food for me, so I didn't really have to get up. I only really had to get up to go to the bathroom and to go and wash. And then it was just the same, me and Roswin. Neil was able to be there during the day from 8 till 8, and there was sort of visitors in the ward, I think from like 12 till 7, something like that. But then after 8 o'clock, it was just like, it was nice because it was quiet. I didn't have to worry about there being any people. But it was also a little bit scary because it was kind of like just me and a baby, and although there are other people around, it did feel quite like we were on our own, which was quite nice in a way, because it felt like we're a team and we're kind of getting through this. So certainly if I'd been at home, I would have had Neil there during the night, so I would have had that support. But I think I also would have felt more, I would have put more pressure on myself to be trying to get up and be moving about, whereas because in the hospital you don't really do anything other than sit in the bed, I could just kind of snooze and eat the snacks that I put in my hospital bag when I was planning to to have a natural delivery. And it was just kind of quite a nice kind of chilled out couple of days, really.
Your first girls' holiday. If we could call it a girls' holiday. So if you were going to give any other first-time mums, anyone who's never had a C-section before, any advice with regard to a C-section, what would you say?
So in terms of the C-section itself, like don't be worried about it. It's all very I suppose it's very routine. Although it's one of those things that it is major abdominal surgery, but people don't think about it that way. So in terms of the recovery, you definitely have to give yourself time. But in terms of the operation itself, it's all very straightforward. It didn't feel particularly, I suppose, clinical, I guess. I don't know if that's because of like the theatre environment. It wasn't particularly like, I suppose if you watch like medical shows, it didn't feel as sort of as cold and clinical as it could.
I guess in a normal situation, if you were having major surgery, your husband wouldn't be next to you holding your hand, and you wouldn't be playing music and conscious. So that really helps to make it a lot more familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I say I was sort of really quite unaware of what was going on around me. Like there were people in the room, but actually we were just kind of focused on chatting to each other and not really thinking about everything else that was going on. So it's definitely, that was fine. And then the recovery, it did take me a little bit of time to recover. I had to have injections for I think it was like 10 days afterwards. So I was having to do those every night, and I had to wear compression socks. I think they told me to wear compression socks for like 6 weeks. I can't remember if I did wear them for 6 weeks. I remember I wore them for quite a long time. But then I say definitely take lots of snacks and drinks, and not so much things to do, but like pack as if you're going for a couple of days away.
A mini break.
Yeah, because you do end up, even if, I know some people do have a C-section and kind of go straight home, but actually, if you prepare yourself for the fact you can be in the hospital for a few days, you'll make sure that you've got everything that you need, and and don't rush yourself to go home. I mean, instead about breastfeeding, I was really lucky because I was in hospital for several days that the midwife who was the breastfeeding specialist midwife was actually on shift and was able to help me, and I had quite a lot of help from the midwives to make sure that breastfeeding was established before I went home. But yeah, and then when you get home, just take things easy. I mean, I remember we just went out like to the shops in Halifax. So it must have been about a week later. And I remember I was kind of pushing the pram, but then I remember I started to feel kind of like twinges in my stomach. And I think that the other thing to remember is that although the kind of sort of where you've got the stitches and the scar might heal very quickly on the outside, there's a lot of healing that needs to go on inside as well. So even now, like when I'm exercising and things, I try to be quite careful if I'm doing sort of lots of kind of core things, because I know, not that I'm sort of particularly worried about it, but just to I'm more aware of it than I was, before I had to.
Kindness to your body, isn't it? It's just being kind again and remembering that there's been a lot of activity in there. Your body's been through a lot in many different ways, and your mind's been through a lot. So it's also just giving yourself that kind of compassion back in the way that you move and the way that you look after yourself.
Yeah, and as I say, it is major surgery, and I think we often forget that it's major surgery, but you do need to give yourself time in the same way you would if you're having any other operation. You'd expect to be in bed or on the sofa for a few weeks and not really doing a lot. I know someone I work with told me, this was before I even knew that I was going to have a C-section, but she'd had a C-section, and she said that her mother-in-law had paid for a cleaner after she'd had the C-section. And now looking back, I'm like, yeah, that would be like absolutely the best
birth plan.
A C-section. What can you get them as a like a gift? And definitely like something like that, or you giving someone some meals that they can just heat up, and because actually you don't want to be getting up and worrying about cleaning or cooking or things like that. So definitely making sure that there's that support around you as much as possible. I know it's difficult with COVID at the moment, but making sure you've got that support so that you're not feeling like you have to do all of those kind of chores around the house, and that actually you can just take the time to recover.
Absolutely. It's like whenever we used to come back from a holiday abroad, my aunt would have come up and just gone into the house before we got there, put some milk in the fridge, put a loaf of bread, maybe some homemade soup, just so that first moment where you walk in through the door, your whole holiday spirit hasn't just been dropped by the fact that you've just come back into, there's no milk, there's no bread, I'm starving, there's nothing to get home with. So yeah, just having that level of support. One of the things that you said there, Rebecca, that I really loved, even when you were driving in from when you were in the car, driving from Skipton to home and then on your way to the hospital, your brain was already saying to you, our baby's being born today, we're going to meet our baby. Your brain wasn't saying, I'm going to have a C-section. And I think there's actually a really big distinction between those two things, because sometimes when people know they have to have a section, if it hasn't been their first choice and they're not really at peace with it yet, the focus can still be that they're going for surgery and that they're going to have a section, as opposed to they're going to meet their baby. And so that's a really nice little thing, but actually it makes a really big difference. And you're remembering anything that happens on the route to that is to have your baby in your arms at the end of it. So, really, really lovely.
Yeah, the thing that I found the most, sort of looking back now, is that all of way through my pregnancy, it was like birth is the end goal. Like that's like the big thing that's coming.
Yeah.
And I didn't really give a lot of thought to what comes after that. And then actually when you're sort of on the other side, when you've got your baby and you look back and you think all of those things that felt like the most important thing in the world are actually not that important. Like, you know, it's not important how you how you give birth. It's about the fact that you've given birth, you've got a baby, and hopefully they are healthy and safely delivered, and that's, you know, the most important bit. I know that when you're sort of, you know, you're pregnant, that's what you want as well, but I think that we put so much expectation isn't the right word, but you're sort of thinking about birth so much that you don't actually think that's really just a small part of it. And then, you know, on the other side, you've got all this time with your baby, and, you know, say how they arrive sort of just it doesn't even really, it's not something you think about, you know, it's just something that's happened. And say, you know, I don't give a lot of thought. Like, obviously I think about the C-section recovery and being careful, but I don't think, I had a C-section. I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking about, you know, my daughter and her growing, and you know, taking care of her, and all of the wonderful things about being a mum.
I think so much of that it's a state of mind as well, though, isn't it? Because for some people, some of what you've described today could be to them traumatic. And yet to you, it's been a positive experience. And so much of it being a positive experience has come from the fact that you felt informed and you felt able to be involved and included in that decision-making process. And each time that you approached a curveball came flying at you, you were able to look at it from a different angle and say, okay, so what does this mean and how is this going to look? And so in many ways, you know, you were in established labour, you were using your hypnobirthing techniques, you were 5 centimetres dilated, you just didn't get to do the part where you delivered Rosalind in a natural birth. But then you also got to experience the C-section side of it, the recovery of that, and everything that came with the actual theatre part, and Neil being able to be there. And Rosalind, 2 strikes for Rosalind, 1 for being breech and 2 for pooping on mum.
Yeah.
And she was still worth it. She's still a gorgeous little bundle.
Yeah. And now when I think about it, I'm like, well, actually, you know, what happened for me, it was really good, because I was able to have those discussions and to make those choices, and to actually have the time to kind of accept what has happened, that my birth plan had changed. I think I probably would have found it harder if it had been more of a, you know, I was in labour and suddenly everything changes. And I would say, you know, the fact that Rosalind came quickly and that I was dilating really quickly, if I hadn't had that scan that I had way back at 36 weeks, then she would have been, you know, it probably would have been a breech delivery, which was definitely, you know, lower on my list than a C-section in terms of things that I had a lot of anxiety about. So, you know, it did work out like the right way in the end. But I say a lot of that came from just understanding what the options were and feeling in control of those decisions, rather than necessarily sort of where the decisions led. Yeah,
absolutely. It's the ability to, the education that you get in the creation of your birth plan, as opposed to whether or not your birth plan happens to the letter. That's always the bit that we come back to again. Know your preferences, and then you know where you can duck and weave along the way and where you can feel involved and included. Well, that has been lovely to hear your experience, how much you literally did your ebb and flow the whole way through and went with whatever had to happen to come up. Is there anything else you would like to add or share today?
No, I was just going to say, just on birth plans, actually, that the thing that really helped me was, rather than to certainly when I first wrote my birth plan, I was very much focused on this is the the dream birth. This is what I want. I want a water birth, and you said about like pain management and things like that. But actually, if you go through the entire birth plan and say, not just this is how I want it to be, but if this happens, this is what I want to happen. And I did do that a little bit at first, where I sort of said, if I have to have a C-section, this is what I want. But then I sort of revisited it and went, okay, this is what's going to happen if I'm probably going to have a C-section. But doing that the first time, like going through the whole thing, was definitely worthwhile, because it did get me thinking about, even though at the point that I was writing it, I was still in the mindset of, but I'm not going to have a C-section. It helped to write those things out, so that then when things did change and I came back to it, I already had that kind of, foundation of, I've already sort of thought about it. Let's give some more thought to it, and how I can bring in the different things and, reflect the discussions that I've been having.
And that's your ability to be able to take a step back from the emotion of the situation and saying, okay, so this is happening. What are we going to do with the cards that we've been dealt with now? What's our next choice? And then moving forward from there. And I think that's a really big part of feeling empowered, and as we said before, of using your brains and your benefits, risks, alternatives, instinct, intuition, do nothing and smile, which we'll talk about lots in other videos, so don't worry if you're like, oh, can't write them down fast enough. So all in all, just an amazing story, and Rosamund, an absolute delight. Used to love having her sitting on my knee, jostling around while everyone was doing complete chilled out relaxations at the end, and Rosamund's, why are you holding me? So cute. Now, Rebecca, if anybody wants to follow you, you've got a good social presence. You're up to a couple of exciting things in different departments. Share a little bit about that.
So I've got a blog, which is www.aminimalistmother.com, where I sort of write about various things to do with motherhood and sustainability and minimalism. And then I also have a podcast, which is called The Intentional Mum, which there's a link to it on my website, but you can also find it on like Spotify and iTunes and Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and kind of all of the podcast providers. But that's where I have conversations with other women, mostly mums, but just other women who are inspiring and doing lots of inspiring things. So, if that's your thing, then sort of when the baby's asleep, get yourself a cup of tea and have a listen. And then I'm always on Instagram, spend most of my time on Instagram.
I see you on Instagram every day. I'm like, there's Rebecca, hi.
Again, something that I did a lot more of, because, when you're sort of trapped under a sleeping baby and all you've got is your phone, it's a bit of connection to other people, and there's a really lovely community of mums on Instagram. So I'm at a.minimalist.mother. I'm there if anyone wants to come and say hello or has any kind of questions or anything like that.
Perfect. And I'll pop those links underneath here as well, so that people can get them, because I always think it's a minimalist mum. It's like the Muppet.
I should probably change it, really, but it is.
No, don't change it. Trust me, don't change it. You'll be forever chasing yourself around links to other podcasts and blogs and trying to change every link back to something else. So no, stay with that name. It works a treat. Perfect. Oh, Rebecca, that's been really, really lovely. I'm sure a huge help for lots of people today. Anyone who is pregnant right now, who's just found out the baby's in breech, who's not sure what to make of a C-section, who's worried the birth plan's going to go out the window, multitude of different ways. I'm really sure that that's helped people. So thank you so much. What are you off to do now?
I don't know. I think Rosamund's about to wake up from her nap, so I'm sure we'll trying to do some kind of messy play or something.
You'll go and have a cuddle. It's a perfect way. I'm going to go out for a walk before the rain comes, because I think there's still a bit of sunshine out there. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, and we will talk to you soon. I'm sure we've got something else up our sleeve for another interview coming soon, so stay close for that. Rebecca and I are cooking up something special. Bye, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.